everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey Besters from the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. How are you, Tracey? It's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Darin. I'm doing really well. And, I think I'm a bit sick of the rain like everyone else in New South Wales at the moment, but doing well. Thank you.
Yep, I'm certainly sick of it too. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by Super Fund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Super Fund Property Valuations your number one choice for all your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details on the online form at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And as I always say, such a valuable resource that of getting proper valuations for your super fund property assets. And obviously, post election, it's going to become even more important because that pall of Division 296 tax is back over us in an unwanted manner. And that's a pretty good lead into what we're going to discuss today. Now, I know that regular followers of this podcast know that we're in a series of podcasts really discussing year-end strategies, and we've done what you must do. Last time we covered what you should do, and the third piece is what you could do, which is a little bit of forward planning, but you would have had to have been under a rock not to have taken notice of all of the discussion around the Division 296 tax again. Certainly in the past week, it's escalated. And of course, that's the tax on total super balances over $3 million of 15%. So we're actually going to discuss that today because it is such a red hot topic at the moment. Well, actually white hot. And probably dispel some myths that we're seeing out there, because I can tell you anecdotally, but that's anecdotally from practitioners, there's a lot of people already ripping money out of their super funds and certainly asking a lot of questions around what can I do to ensure that I'm not caught by it. So Tracey, I'll start with you. Where do you want to start?
Yeah,
Sorry, I'll let
absolutely.
you
Thank you,
start
Darin.
because you've noticed a lot of conversation or discussion about this.
Yeah, definitely, Darin, and thank you so much. And absolutely, we wanted to jump on this, $3 million tax, or the $3 million tax. I think it's colloquially called.
Colloquially
Get
called.
that through, at the moment. And I think that there are a lot of, there's a lot of anger and a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation that I'm seeing, even in the forums and commentary that I follow all the time. So I thought it would be good to have a conversation about this. And we promise we'll go back to the could do in the next podcast episode, but we just really wanted to jump on this one today. So, Darin, I think the first myth that I'd like to just dispel for everybody is that this is not law yet. There seems to be some misunderstanding or misinformation that, wait a second, this was passed last year or passed it by the previous government and the previous parliament, but it actually isn't law yet, is it?
No. The bill was only tabled and it got through the lower house, of course, because the Labor Party had the majority there. But there was a lot of horse trading going on because there was an impasse in the Senate, and they were trying to gain support from the crossbenchers to push the bill through. But unfortunately, they couldn't do it. They refused to yield on any changes that were suggested to the bill, and so they were kind of at a stalemate by the time that the election was called. However, I will say this, that obviously we were doing a lot of commentary in the lead up to the election as to what would go on. And of course, we didn't know what was going to happen post-election. Now, a lot of people were concentrating on what would happen in the lower house, how many seats Labor would win, potentially how many seats the coalition would win, and whether or not there'd be a hung parliament. Well, of course, the results didn't turn out that way, but pretty much everybody ignored what might happen in the Senate. And as far as the bill passing goes, Labor no longer needs the support of the crossbench in the Senate. So with any legislation, not just this bill, they can actually rely on their own numbers plus the Greens and it will get across the line. So where people might be a little bit confused about this is a lot of the rhetoric now is that it's a foregone conclusion that it will go through. But in actual fact, it hasn't actually been passed.
Yes. And in fact, just taking that one step further, we actually haven't seen the wording of the reintroduced bill. We haven't seen anything. And, as far as I understand, the House of Reps doesn't sit until July. So
Yeah,
we're
I
not going
think
to
that's
see
right.
anything in terms of what's introduced into Parliament until at least July.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Tracy, you've noticed quite a bit of discussion on, as you mentioned at the start, from the forums that you usually visit around superannuation and self-managed super. Can you
Yeah.
share with us some of the comments? Because some of the comments are actually um, perpetuating myths, I suppose, or exposing myths about this whole situation.
Yeah, sure, Darren. Now, if I was to read every single comment that I would like to share, we'll be here for about 3 hours, which you and I could easily discuss
Oh,
for three
yeah,
hours, this particular topic.
absolutely.
No challenge at all. Perhaps over a glass of wine would be much more important. But anyway, I'm really disappointed, Darren. I'm really disappointed with some of the commentary that is sitting in forums from people about this topic, and a lot of them are posting as anonymous, so we're getting lots of keyboard warriors on the
Yeah.
forums. But there was one comment that was made, and it basically said the government needs more tax. People over $3 million are not going to get much sympathy from anyone, including me. This is not me talking, by the way.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't like the tax, then why don't you come up with an option and stand for Parliament next election? Boom, boom. Not very
Well,
helpful, I don't think that comment is.
just a ridiculously simplistic statement. I wouldn't even call that an argument
Mm,
about how this whole thing works. Now, um, I will make one prediction. Now, obviously, I don't know how this is going to play out, but if the government continues to dig its heels in and not make any amendments to the bill as it stands, there is no indexation measure
mm,
in the
mm.
bill. So this guy and any other keyboard warrior out there who might be crowing about the fact that, well, if you got 3 million bucks in your super fund, you deserve it, right? You
Yeah,
deserve to be punished. You're getting a rort. You deserve to be punished. Well, be careful what you wish for,
yeah,
because without an indexation measure, that net that you see is probably pretty narrow right now and that you're escaping it,
yeah,
that's going to expand. I know that a lot of people don't really understand the concept of tax bracket creep.
yeah,
But this is what's going to happen with superannuation taxation if there is no indexation in this measure. So all of you guys out there who are cheering this on and thinking, ha 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 ha, if you got
mm,
over $3 million, you deserve to be punished. Well, we've seen high inflationary times recently, so we all know what is possible should some sort of catastrophic event such as COVID hit global economies.
yeah,
Um, no indexation means that 3 million bucks, uh, of course, today will not be $3 million in say 5 years' time, and that net will broaden because
yeah,
it'll capture people that right now you think that no, I don't have to worry.
yeah.
Yeah, just wait, just wait. So
Exactly.
all I would say is, yeah, cheer if you like. Be careful about what you wish for.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, Darren. And that's what I mean. I'm disappointed with this kind of, it's almost become this, rich versus poor and us versus them. And, this really horrible argument where people literally are cheering on and wanting people to be punished for, the fact that they have more than what, that person might have. And that's what it disappoints me. It really does disappoint me from a humanity perspective. And I just think I expect better from everyday Aussies to be able to say that we're all in the same situation here. We all want the best for this country. And, I just find it sad. So, but those comments that you've made, I think, are absolutely valid in response to these people that are saying this. And there's so much, there's so many comments along that same line. Well, if you're rich, yeah, then you've got the money to pay this tax, and that's another thing. And I think that there's been a bit of media around. Well, what about the farmers? What about farmers that have farmland in super? And I read a comment a couple of days ago, and it said, "Well, farmers are rich, so they'll be all right."
Yeah,
Farmers are rich, so they'll be all right.
and it really goes to the heart. And I don't really know whether or not the general populace has an understanding of how egregious the concept of taxing unrealized capital gains is.
Yeah,
That just because an asset appreciates in value doesn't mean that you're enjoying that right now.
yes,
You don't enjoy it. It's like with your shares. I mean, this is my complaint all the time, and why wouldn't people think like this when you got ridiculous headlines of when there's a market correction, millions of dollars wiped off people's superannuation
mm,
balances.
mm,
Well, I would actually question well, number one, you do realize that it's just a paper loss, which means that you don't lose that money until whatever
well,
position those shares are sold. So my next question to the reporters who stick to that headline and broadcast that headline is, okay, so Australian Super Fund is the largest super fund in the country. Can
mm,
anybody provide me evidence on the day that the market dropped that they sold every single position that they had in Australian equities? Because
mhm,
then that would be true. They would have realized the loss and their members would have lost a lot of money on their accounts. But
mhm,
other than that, no. And then if
yeah,
there's a rebound, we don't hear about millions of dollars added back to super fund balances the next day. We
no,
don't.
no,
And of course, we've seen it already with the effect of the Trump tariffs
mm,
of the fluctuation in markets. And we hear doom and gloom about, oh, the stock market went down because in response to what's happening on the New York Stock Exchange, blah, 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 blah. But they don't, the thing rebounds. Don't
mhm.
hear anything about that.
No, of
So
course not.
this whole myth or misunderstanding or lack of understanding really about realized and unrealized capital gains is bad, and I think it's actually pretty dangerous because it
Yeah,
means that if a policy like this is allowed to progress, most of the people don't actually understand what the mechanics are and what the implications of it are. And of course, we won't get into this, but I think it would be naive not to believe that this is just a first step. So
yeah,
again, I say to the people who are cheering this on now, be careful what you wish for, because what if tomorrow it's like, oh, well, we started with super.
yeah,
Let's have a look at something else that we can
yeah,
tax in the
yeah,
form of an unrealized capital gain.
yeah,
And eventually, when it comes down the line and it actually has a wider effect, because as that keyboard warrior says, the government's got to raise money. Well, there's an effective way is just to broaden these taxation principles out. I'll bet you they'll be the first person to complain about, oh, how egregious this is and this is so
yeah.
unfair on me and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? You
Somewhere.
wanted this. You wanted the first domino. You cheered on the government to push the first domino
Yes,
over.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
don't. I mean, I don't like it. But when the wheel comes around and you're facing the punishment
Yeah,
or the liability, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to
no,
hear about how unfair it is.
yes,
Because all of a sudden when it affects you, oh, then it's the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen. You
exactly
know,
right. And it
but this
starts
is
somewhere.
such a selfish issue, a selfish argument that people make. I remember one individual uh, cheered the fact that when we were in COVID, all conferences were held online. So it was fabulous that, this person didn't have to spend an airfare or accommodation going to
Mm,
the conference. And my
yeah,
reaction is, yeah, you do realize that without having in-person conferences, you won't get sponsors.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if you don't get sponsors, you won't have professional bodies anymore. Is
Yes.
that a good result? Simply on the basis that you didn't have to spend an airfare or pay accommodation to go. Like
Yeah.
like these views are so narrow sighted, it's
Yes.
ridiculous. And it I mean it really does the public a disservice, and it downright makes me pretty angry.
Yeah, I can tell that. It kind of makes me think of the saying, Darin. It's kind of like more tax for thee, but not for me. And I say that with glee. You know, it's kind of like that
Yeah,
philosophy isn't it, at the moment. Now, I just wanted to explain for anyone that's listening to us, Darin, who hasn't heard this terminology about realized and unrealized gains. I just wanted to quickly explain the difference between those two things, if you don't mind, because we talk in this language all the time, but sometimes people haven't heard this stuff. So if I have some property or if I have an asset and I sell it and it goes up in value between what I bought it for, what I sold it for, and I sell it, that's a realized gain. So I've actually got the cash in my pocket for what I sold that asset for, and I've made some actual cash, right? And like you said before, if something just goes up on paper, so we haven't sold anything, but between yesterday and today, that value has gone up. That's an unrealized gain. And it's always going to be considered an unrealized gain until such time that we actually exchange that asset for some cash. So the thing that we're all kind of barking on about with the unfairness of this, this Div 296 is that the tax that people will have to pay is going to be determined in part by this unrealized gain. So you're paying tax on an asset value that you have not received cash for. And that's the unfair part about that particular part of what the proposed legislation was previously.
yeah, yeah. Pretty ridiculous and
Yeah.
unprecedented. And what I would say is that overseas where these sorts of measures have been contemplated in the past, they've all
Mm.
been unsuccessful.
Yes.
I could say disastrous, but certainly unsuccessful. So,
Yes.
I mean, the other thing is, and the government has, I don't know exactly how much, $40 million in the forward estimates
Mm.
for this measure.
Mm.
Well, I haven't seen their assumptions, but there is one thing that's clear, and it's already clear now that it's still a proposal. It's already changing people's behaviour. So
Yes.
if you look at implementing this policy on a static basis, it's not whatever your assumptions are. More people than not are going to try and get under that $3 million threshold. In
Of
which
course,
case,
right?
potentially you won't actually be raising as much revenue as whatever your forecast. And believe me, I used to be an accountant. I know exactly how forecasts work and how exactly you can make them more favorable. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a piece of Swiss cheese, basically. There are so many holes in this, and people shouldn't be duped by, arguments that are made, as I said at the beginning, on such simplistic terms without actually understanding what the implications might be.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
another one, you wanted to actually point out how the $3 million threshold works as well, because I think there's another
Yeah.
misunderstanding or misconception how it actually applies, isn't there, Tracey?
Yeah, exactly, Darin. There is, and I'm glad you brought that one up because I was going to mention that one just now as well. So, um, I think we need to kind of talk about this in the concept of being caught in a net. So, if you're so this is a test in time, right? So it's going to be a test at the beginning of the year versus a test at the end of the year. Now, currently, or as per the previous legislation that was introduced, this was going to start 1st of July 2025 to 30th of June 2026. That's the first year of assessment of Div 296. So that doesn't mean that we're going to start paying tax based on 1st of July 2025. We're not going to have to, we're not going to be looking at whether we're over $3 million or under $3 million until 30th of June 2026. So for
Yes.
anyone who is freaking out that you've only got, 6 weeks to go, whatever it is, 4 weeks to go, 5 weeks to go to end of June, and you don't know what to do, please just take a really deep breath, pause for a second, and talk to your accountant or talk to your advisor. Don't go and sell anything just yet. Don't do anything just yet unless you have got the advice to go and do that. And unfortunately, we are seeing people out there flogging off assets, aren't we, Darin? Which is a really sad situation to see at the
Yeah,
moment.
there's anecdotal evidence, but of course there's flow-on effects just on that point. There's flow-on effects to the economy as well. I mean, Jeff Wilson
Yeah.
from Wilson Asset Management was saying that he's already seeing some of his clients with self-managed super funds ripping money out of their fund and
Yeah.
investing in the family home. Now, that might be buying a new family home or whatever, but they're basically putting that money into their own residence.
Yeah.
Because guess what? There's a CGT exemption for your home residence. So if
Yeah.
you build that asset up and eventually it's sold, well, you won't get caught by capital gains tax. So they're already
No.
looking at this, but it's counterproductive to another segment of what the government wants to achieve because we've got this affordable housing crisis.
That's right.
If you think, what do you think that people ripping money out of their super fund and investing in residential property is going to do? Let me have a think about that. Oh, it might overheat the market and prices might go back up. So there are all sorts of things. I won't go into seed capital for startup ventures, but a lot of that actually does come from the SMSF sector as well.
Yeah.
Um, so there are so many flow-on effects that I'm sure, I mean, this is going to be a situation of where if it gets implemented the way it is, some of these flow-on effects will have adverse results, and then, we'll have the geniuses in Canberra scratching their heads asking, how did that happen?
Yeah. And then there'll be all of these policy papers, Darin, about, well, what should we do to fix this problem that we created, right? So
100%. And just the last thing on the $3 million threshold itself, it's actually on total super balances, Tracy, and that means individuals.
that's right. Yes, that's right, Darin. So thank you. So that is another myth to dispel. So someone actually posted a question on a forum and they said, is it kind of, is it $3 million in the fund? Because this is a self-managed super fund forum. Is it $3 million in the fund, or is it per person, per individual? And it's actually per individual. But remember, if you've got multiple superannuation accounts, then it's actually not just what's sitting in your SMSF account. If you've got an
No.
SMSF account and then you've got an industry fund account or another retail fund account or some other defined benefit pension or something else, your total super balance is actually the combination of all of those things. So
Yeah.
that would be an interesting calculation for someone to do, wouldn't it? How does that actually affect you? And, what value do you base it on, and how do you actually pay that? But so that's a true point. It's actually per individual. It's a per member calculation. And so if you are, let's say that at the beginning of the financial year, you are below $3 million. Let's just hypothetically say you're below $3 million, but something happens throughout the year and you tip over that $3 million mark. And then you kind of freak out because you're like, oh no, now I'm into Div 296 territory. There is an ability for you to be able to reduce back down below the $3 million at the end, and you're not going to be caught by this Div 296. So there's a lot of strategy that can potentially be implemented. So it's really, really important to seek advice. Is
Yeah,
kind of the
100%. And as we go along, I'm sure the discussions around superannuation will involve more member balance equalization strategies,
yes,
because obviously it would be extremely um, ill-founded, I suppose you could say, if you had a super fund in total of $5 million, but one member had $3 million and one member had $1 million. Sorry, that doesn't quite add up, does it? Sorry, $4 million. Say someone had 3 million and someone had 1 million. It would be silly for the one person who had $3 million to be caught by this tax rather
yes,
than equalize the two balances. So you had two and two and you both
yes.
in the clear. So
Yeah.
we're going to be hearing a lot more about strategies where you can hopefully get to that outcome. And again, that's another thing that and that's a legitimate thing, obviously, but did the government put that into their forecast about how these strategies might might be implemented to try and manage people's tax situations in light of
Yeah.
this new bill? I severely doubt it. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, but they haven't proven to any of us, I think, that they're worthy of being given the benefit of the doubt like that.
And Darin, totally agree with your comments on that. I totally agree. The other thing I think is important to just mention, Darin, is that we're talking $3 million, right? You know, we're just saying it's the $3 million test, it's the $3 million threshold. But let's remind everybody that the Greens actually want it to be $2 million. They don't
Yes.
want it to be $3 million. So that's going to be a little bit interesting to see how that plays out, because remember, Labor, as you mentioned before, you know, the Senate is no longer our balancing power, if you like, to balance out the House of Reps. So the Senate, that Labor still effectively need the Greens in the Senate to get the legislation through the Senate. So are they going to bow to the pressure of the Greens to get this through? And are they going to reduce it down to $2 million as opposed to 3? Now, Labor is saying no, they're firm on 3. The Greens are saying, well, we want 2. So where are we going to end up with that? And you know, and if we're having a conversation about $2 million, do all of these people that want to punish the rich then suddenly think, well, wait a second, $2 million isn't that much money,
Yeah.
but $3 million is, you know?
Again, it goes in the category of be careful what you wish for. Now, if anybody thinks that this sort of commitment is unprecedented, I would remind them of. So the Greens basically have asked for two things. They want the threshold to go down by $2 million and they want to ban limited recourse borrowing arrangements in SMSFs. Something
Yeah.
completely separate from the issue, but it's an old chestnut that they always raise when something around SMSFs come up.
Yeah. And it wasn't an or, was it, Darin? It was an end.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not the government will negotiate or give you one thing but not the other. Now, Jim
Mm.
Chalmers did make comments this week about banning LRBAs. These are his words, is not something we're considering, right?
Mm.
Now, that's completely different to say, no, we won't do it. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think Albanese said pretty much the same thing when he was talking about changing the stage 3 tax cuts. No, we're not considering that now.
Mm.
No, it's not
Mm.
in our consideration. And of course, we all know what happened there.
Yeah.
So these mealy-mouthed words from Canberra do not take any comfort if you think that you can draw a conclusion from that, which means that we don't even know. I know that Chalmers has also refuted the fact that he won't change the threshold, but who, how can we believe you? You changed the stage 3 tax cuts. How can we believe you about anything? You actually said that you weren't actually going to change superannuation policy. You did that, didn't you? Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So,
Exactly.
um, you can't take solace in anything that's coming from Canberra right now. And again, to the people who are cheering on the tax in its current form, who actually don't realise what the implications are and how it will work, uh, yeah, again, be careful what you wish for, because what happens if, yeah, we're all for this. What? It's more severe now. Oh, what? I'm caught. Oh no, this is the worst thing in the world. How could you do this?
Exactly.
I'm not rich. And let me just qualify the rich statement
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people have a perception of. I think when the tax scales are done, whenever tax reform or rebates or anything like that is discussed, isn't the threshold of $80,000 a year salary considered rich? It's something around there, which I would actually suggest that doesn't fall into the high income category for Australians. So, depending on your definition of rich, and again, look, I could go on for hours about this. If you think that people with $3 million in this super fund have got away with something and why should they be getting these concessions and blah, 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 do consider this. in having the $3 million in their super fund, you don't think they've paid tax along the way before that money actually went into super? Hmm?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe. But no,
I think
we look at these things in isolation, which is ridiculous. And then one last point, Tracy, if they've got $3 million in their super fund, do you reckon they'll be drawing an age pension? Um,
exactly.
Probably not, which means
Yeah.
that guess what? They're not actually a burden for the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but we never hear that argument either, do we?
No, and the other argument that I think is coming up a lot is that the rich or the people with more than $3 million or the wealthy or whatever terminology you want to use, depending on what forum you're reading, is that they're all using super as an intergenerational wealth vehicle. It's designed for spending in your retirement. And that at face value, you could say, well, okay, that comment is fair in at face value. However, at some point, that point being death of the member, that money is going to have to be dealt with. So that money in superannuation is not going to be able to stay inside of the self-managed super fund for an indefinite period of time. And that's something I'm going to be talking about at the Trustee Day in September. Is around, well, what are death benefits, and what does that mean, and what do we have to
Yeah.
do with our super balances? So I think that is another misunderstanding in the public arena around what actually happens to superannuation. And you're just parking this money in the superannuation, concessionally taxed superannuation environment for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And as much as we would like to be able to do that, eventually at some point, a portion or if not all of the superannuation balance will have to come out.
Well, Tracy, I've actually asked questions about that. I've asked questions of practitioners about that to look, when you're approached around SMSF strategies, does anybody actually come up to you and say that, look, I'd like to establish a fund, I'd like to put strategies in place because I want to build wealth so I can transfer it to my children and their children as well? You know what? The categorical answer is no.
That's right.
So I don't know where they think that they get these examples from, that people are using this as some sort of intergenerational wealth tool. The only way that you can avoid that is if we can actually predict exactly how long we're going to live. Because
Exactly.
if the system worked perfectly, I would spend my last dollar of superannuation on the day I die.
Yes.
And then there would be nothing left over. Now we all know that that's not a realistic possibility. And I will also say this, that is it so bad that the result of having leftover savings in your superannuation is transferred to the next generation? Because guess what? That actually might help them
Yes.
afford a home.
Yes.
And
And
isn't
the
that a
crazy
solution that everybody's bloody crying out for? You
But isn't
know?
this the crazy thing, Darin, though? If you've got the money outside of super, right? And let's say that your example that Jeff Wilson was saying about people pulling money out and investing it into their family homes. Nobody cares about how much wealth you have in your family home, even though that's concessionally taxed, i.e., it's exempt from capital gains tax. So
Yes.
there's not this uproar about that, is there? But there is an uproar, a seemingly massive uproar about, those who have more money in super. Doesn't
It,
make
it's
sense to
it's only because these myths are perpetuated by the people who want to argue against it.
me.
I think the whole notion of a tax concession and missing like tax foregone are two things, two concepts that are completely conflated these days. They
Yeah,
don't mean the same thing, but whenever, the budget comes around and these arguments come up, they're mixed
yeah,
into the same bucket, which is absolutely not true. And it's
yeah,
it's actually um, erroneous to
yeah.
claim that it is. And I see a lot of presentations arguing that the tax concessions are too good, to say that in 30 years time, the tax concessions given in superannuation will actually outweigh the age pension liability that we're paying. So
Mhm.
that means that the system's broken and it needs to be fixed. I would actually argue that if you're going to throw me that data, that actually proves that the system is working.
Yeah.
because if the superannuation system is providing more tax benefits for people who are funding their own retirement and the payouts for the age pension are less,
Yeah.
doesn't that mean that there's less people on the public purse? And doesn't that mean actually for future generations, you're not going to have to raise that government revenue to fund that?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
missing something, but I would have thought that logically it actually goes against the argument and proves that the system is working. I don't know. That's just me.
And I think my final comment and question actually to those who are cheering this on with glee, as I said before, at what point do what dollar point do you think is too low to start taxing unrealized gains? You think 3 million is fine. Is 2 million then not okay? $1 million, is that not okay? $500,000, is that not okay? $367,000, is that too low? Like, you can't have it both ways. If you cheer on taxing unrealized gains at a $3 million level, you better be happy for it at a lower level or on other assets that are not sitting inside the super fund. So, have a think about that.
Yeah, and I know, look, anybody who's listening to this and wants to criticize us for making these points, I know what's going to be labeled as well. Of course, you two are going to say that because you're both invested in the self-managed super system.
Sure.
But know this, if it wasn't just targeted at self-managed super, I would still think that this policy is very, very poor. Not only poor in its conception, but poor in the way it's written. And no doubt, following on from that, it will be poor in the way it's implemented as well. I think we can
Yeah.
guarantee that. So I'm not doing it because I'm doing it out of self-interest. Yes, there is an element of self-interest in what I'm doing because of my readership, but poor policy is just poor policy, and
Yes.
it
And this
should be
is poor
called out.
policy. Yes.
And
And
biases should be set aside
yes.
because it's no justification for a poor piece of policy.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I guess that for anyone listening, just as I said before, please don't panic just right now. Don't panic. There's time to do what you need to do if you are going to be potentially caught up in these measures. Do not do anything until we've at least seen the draft legislation back before
Yeah,
Parliament, so we know
yeah,
what we're working with. So
yeah.
if anyone says you must go and do something straight away, just remind yourself that we don't even have legislation yet. We don't have a start date. We don't have the words on the page. We don't know what it's going to look like exactly. We're all just surmising based on what we've heard before at this point. So just take some time, take that deep breath, and we'll update you even on this podcast. Once we've heard more.
Well, we've actually gone a little bit over time, and what a surprise that is on this topic, which I said at the start is absolutely white hot. And I could, as you can imagine, I could go on, for the next 12 hours about shooting down everything that's wrong with this. And again, it's not from a point of self-interest. I just think it's poor policy and it needs to be pointed out. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we don't have time for that. We've run out of time. And I think I actually did pretty well because I went through that whole podcast without swearing, and boy, did I want to.
I had the pause beeper ready to go, Darin. Is that 30-second pause or something?
Yeah, we can go back and edit this and put bleeps in, but I didn't think that that was really the right thing to have to do or to ask my team to do. So we'll wrap it up there. No doubt, as the pieces fall into place, as we find out more about this, we will keep you informed about what it all means. And this will be an ongoing discussion, um, certainly as we get to the 1st of July and beyond to find out exactly what will be going on with this policy. So on that note, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Tracey, for joining me today and going through some of these issues and maybe dispelling some of the myths that we've heard so far.
My pleasure, Darin, and thanks for jumping on this topic with me.
No problem. Thanks also to Superfund Property Valuations for their continued support of these podcasts. Thank you to my production team for finalizing these podcasts and uploading it on all of our mediums that we disseminate this information on. But most importantly, thank you to you for joining us and listening. We hope you got something out of it. Hopefully, we've dispelled some myths, and we'll join you next time on the Trusted Trustee podcast. Bye for now.
Bye for now.